Tonight, a shield collides with a file. A congresswoman enters, believing identity will end the questions. A former president enters, carrying receipts, marriage records, timelines, silence. A studio built like a courtroom. One yes or no question no one wants answered. And a trail of documents that refuse to blink. Stay, because what breaks next isn't policy. It's credibility on live national television. Ilhan Omar walked into that Fox News studio carrying a shield she'd used for years, the kind that doesn't stop bullets but stops questions, the kind that doesn't refute a claim but punishes the person who dares to ask. Say the word. Islamophobia. Say it clean, say it loud, and watch people back down before the conversation ever reaches the paperwork. You've seen this dynamic in American politics so many times it barely registers anymore. A controversy appears. Someone asks for specifics. The accused doesn't answer the specifics. Instead, they put the question itself on trial. Suddenly, the issue isn't what happened. The issue is why you're asking. And if you can make the room feel morally dirty for demanding clarity, you can walk out without ever giving it. That shield thrives in spaces where everyone is scared of being called a bigot, more than they're scared of being lied to. It thrives in institutions that run on reputational risk management. It thrives in a media culture addicted to context, when context functions like fog, something that makes the outline of a document just blurry enough to keep it from becoming a headline. Fox didn't build this night for fog. They build it like a courtroom clash. Immigration and identity, the Omar controversy. They didn't promise policy nuance. They promised confrontation. They promised allegations that had hovered for years, mostly avoided, sometimes mocked, occasionally whispered as conspiracy, but never really resolved in the only way a public deserves resolution. Clear answers, under pressure, in plain English. And here's the first thing you need to understand as a viewer before any exhibit hits the screen. This wasn't just a debate. This was a test of whether the shield still worked when the question came stapled to a record. Whether identity could still end a conversation when a timeline was waiting in the wings. The stage looked like it wanted blood. Two podiums angled toward each other, not parallel, not polite. Massive HD screens behind them, the kind you don't install for abstract ideals. You install them for exhibits, for dates, for signatures. For the moment, the camera zooms in on a highlighted line, and a face changes because the argument is no longer philosophical. Brett Baer sat at the moderator's desk with the controlled expression of a man who knows he's about to ask for civility in a room built for impact. The crowd was massive, hundreds packed into a studio setup larger than what you normally see for a political hit. The atmosphere wasn't balanced. It was dominated. Pro-Trump energy flooding the room, with a smaller pocket of Omar supporters gathered together like a defensive island, clapping hard, as if volume could create safety. Security was heavy, not because a cable show is a war zone, but because controversies become dangerous when they turn into identity collisions. And identity collisions become combustible when you add a live audience and a national broadcast. Omar walked out first. Cheers from her section. Then boos, loud enough to feel like a wall. She wore her hijab and a dark suit, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. She didn't look like someone walking into a debate. She looked like someone walking into an accusation and refusing to perform guilt. That posture isn't cosmetic. That's political muscle memory. She set her hands on the podium, fingers spread. She scanned the room, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. Who is hostile? Who is sympathetic? Where can I pivot if they press? Which phrases shut down the room fastest? 2 minutes later, Donald Trump walked out to a roar that didn't sound like approval. It sounded like ownership. The cheers rolled for minutes. Chants mixed. His name, USA, and demands that sounded less like debate prompts and more like courtroom slogans. Trump didn't rush to speak. He let it build because he understands something basic about modern politics. Volume has become its own form of evidence. If a crowd believes you, half the audience at home assumes you must have a reason. He stepped to his podium carrying thick folders, not one, multiple. He set them down with deliberate heaviness. That sound, paper meeting wood, wasn't just sound. It was stagecraft, a physical promise. I didn't come here to trade lines. I came here to introduce exhibits. Omar's confident expression wavered for a fraction of a second. A micropause, the kind you only notice if you've watched enough trials to recognize when a witness realizes the cross-examination is about to begin. Byer opened with the formalities, serious allegations, public interest, importance of facts. He asked the crowd to keep it respectful. He reminded everyone that this should be substantive. That reminder survived maybe 1 minute, because the moment he gave Omar the floor, she didn't go to substance. She went to the shield. She began in a steady cadence, a practiced rhythm. She was here because certain people refused to accept a Muslim refugee woman in Congress. The allegations were lies spread by Islamophobes and racists. She turned to Trump directly and widened the battlefield. He had demonized Muslims, refugees, immigrants, and he spread lies about her because she spoke truth to power. Her supporters applauded like they'd heard the incantation that had protected her before. And for a second you could feel the old dynamic trying to reassert itself. The accusation becomes proof of prejudice. The question becomes the crime. Trump didn't counter with rage. He countered with procedure. He looked at her with a cold patience, contempt mixed with anticipation. And when he spoke, it wasn't a shout at first. It was conversational, almost courteous, like a prosecutor who understands the first step is always to sound reasonable. "Ilhan," he said, and the way he said it was half familiarity, half bait. "Can I call you Ilhan?" Then, without changing his tone much at all, he snapped the lane narrow. "Let's talk about immigration fraud. Specifically, yours." That's how you do it. You compliment lightly, you appear civil, you reduce the distance. Then you name the charge, not broadly, not as an abstraction, personally, directly. And suddenly, the shield has to do actual work. Trump opened his first folder and pulled out a document. He didn't wait for a rebuttal. He didn't let her reclaim the moral high ground. He asked a simple, factual question, simple enough that refusing to answer would look like evasion. "You came to America as a refugee from Somalia in 1995, correct?" Omar started to pivot toward story. Violence, survival, trauma. But Trump cut the pivot off with the prosecutor's trick. Return to the question, not the narrative. "I asked a simple question, yes or no." "Yes," she said. "And America gave you safety, opportunity, citizenship," Trump continued, stacking premises like bricks. "Even elected you to Congress, correct?" "Yes." "Good," he said. And that good wasn't praise. It was a pin sliding into place. "Now let's talk about Ahmed Nursaid Elmi." The air changed. You could feel the studio tighten. Not because everyone suddenly knew the truth, but because everyone suddenly understood what kind of night this was going to be. The room wasn't listening like a crowd anymore. It was listening like a jury. Trump signaled to the screens. A marriage record appeared, big, bright, impossible to ignore. Names, date, Minneapolis. The boring, bureaucratic look that makes people believe things because it looks like the same paperwork they fear when they deal with government. He read it slowly, letting the dullness of the format do the persuasion for him. Ilhan Omar, he said. Married Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. February 12, 2009. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then he looked at her. You married Ahmed Elmi in February 2009, yes or no? Omar's face tightened. She tried to invoke privacy, tried to frame it as a smear. Trump didn't bite. He did what cross-examiners do when the witness starts performing. Yes or no? She couldn't deny what was on the screen. Yes. Thank you, Trump said, and the thank you landed like a stamp. Now, who is Ahmed Elmi? He was someone I was married to, Omar answered carefully, vague enough to avoid stepping on the next landmine. Trump didn't blink. He asked the question that, in this format, isn't just a question. It's an instrument. It's a demand for a clean sentence that can be replayed as a clip. Is he your brother? For a moment, the studio went silent in that eerie way only live television can create. No cheering, no booing. Just the hum of lights and the faint click of cameras. The kind of silence that tells you everyone knows the stakes. Omar flushed. The shield came up hard. That is a disgusting smear, she said, voice sharpened, outrage deployed. Trump didn't argue with the outrage. He didn't debate the morality of the question. He did something more lethal. He returned to the lane he controlled. I didn't ask if it's a smear, he said. I asked if he's your brother, yes or no. Omar tried to refuse without refusing. I will not dignify. That's not an answer, Trump cut in, and you could hear the temperature drop. Is he your brother? She repeated the deflection. Islamophobia, racism, dangerous accusations. And here's the mechanics you need to notice, viewer. The shield doesn't actually answer. It only attempts to make answering unnecessary. It only works if the room agrees. The question is forbidden. This room didn't agree. Trump paused just for a beat. Not long enough to look uncertain, long enough to make the silence speak. A beat that says, if it's false, say no. A beat that lets the audience feel the absence as a presence. Then he pivoted, exactly as a prosecutor pivots when the witness refuses to answer. You don't argue. You introduce exhibits. You make the refusal look like an admission without ever saying the word admission. Let me show you why people are asking, Trump said, voice steady, and the screens changed. Photos appeared, childhood images presented as family context, framed in a way designed to suggest familiarity. Then school records, lines highlighted, names and parent entries emphasized. Then archived social posts, screenshots with certain words emphasized, the classic before it was deleted implication. One exhibit after another, each one not necessarily definitive alone, but stacked together to create a psychological impression. There is a pattern, and the pattern is what the shield cannot dissolve. Omar's eyes flicked to the screen and then away again, like someone trying not to give the camera a reaction shot. Her jaw tightened. She didn't look confused. She looked cornered. Trump's cadence changed slightly, still controlled, but now moving with the momentum of someone who believes the room is already leaning his way. Here's the timeline investigators and researchers have discussed, he said, and the screens shifted to a sequence of dates and names laid out like a prosecution board. Arrival, marriage, filings, divorces. He narrated it as a theory based on records, careful language on paper, but forceful framing in delivery. And this is where the confrontation became something bigger than one allegation. Because what Trump was really doing, whether you love him or hate him, was building a moral trap. America gave you refuge, safety, citizenship. So if the records suggest manipulation of the immigration system, then the accusation becomes not just legal, but ethical. It becomes a betrayal story. And betrayal stories are the most addictive kind of political content because they don't require policy knowledge. They require instinct. The instinct to feel offended when a system is exploited. The instinct to resent being called a bigot for asking a basic question. Omar attempted to regain control. She tried to widen the frame again, to return to identity, to imply danger. Trump cut the escape route the way an experienced cross-examiner does. Keep it narrow, keep it concrete, keep it binary. "I'm not asking about feelings," his tone implied. "I'm asking about the record." Then he did the most effective thing a prosecutor can do on television. He let the room sit in the gap between allegation and answer. He didn't fill the gap with more yelling. He filled it with silence, paper, and the audience's own imagination. Because when a public figure won't say no to a question that should have an easy no, the audience starts writing their own conclusion. And this was only the first folder. On that podium, in those thick stacks of paper, were the rest of the night's weapons: 9/11 language, tweets, resolutions, payments, speeches, oath language, each one designed to tighten the vice. The plan was clear. Start with the shield, crack it with a yes or no, then bury the viewer in receipts until the shield doesn't look like protection anymore. It looks like deflection. And as the studio held its breath, as Omar stayed locked behind moral language and Trump stayed locked on the record, you could feel what was coming next. Because the first rule of these receipts-driven narratives is simple. Once the first silence lands, the rest of the night becomes escalation. The silence didn't break on its own. Trump broke it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He didn't repeat the question again. Instead, he did something far more dangerous for anyone relying on deflection. He moved forward in the record as if the refusal itself had already been noted. "Let's talk about what the documents show," he said, almost casually, as if the question had been answered in some procedural way that no longer required her participation. That's a prosecutorial maneuver you see in real courtrooms all the time. When a witness won't answer, you don't beg. You don't argue. You introduce corroboration. You make the jury feel like the answer is already in evidence. The screens shifted again. This time it wasn't photos. It wasn't social media. It was paperwork. The kind that looks boring until you realize boring is exactly what makes it persuasive. School enrollment records from Somalia, displayed with yellow highlights over parent names. 2 students. Same household. Same mother. Same father. Different surnames. Identical lineage entries. Trump let the audience take it in before he spoke again. "These are school records," he said. "Same parents, same household. Years before any political career. Years before anyone was paying attention." Omar shook her head slightly, lips pressed together, as if disbelief itself could invalidate the document. She didn't reach for a counter-record. She didn't offer an alternative explanation. She went back to the shield. "These so-called records," she said, "have been debunked. This is the same Islamophobic conspiracy that's been circulating for years." Notice the pattern. She didn't say wrong. She didn't say fabricated. She said Islamophobic. The accusation wasn't addressed. The motive was. Trump seized on that gap instantly. "If they're wrong," he said, "explain how." Pause. No answer. "If they're fabricated," he continued, "tell us who fabricated them." Another pause. He turned slightly, angling his body not toward her, but toward the audience. "That's not accidental. That's a signal. He wasn't cross-examining her anymore. He was inviting the jury to notice what wasn't happening. "You've had years to explain this," he said. "Years. And every time someone asks, you don't explain. You accuse." He flipped another page in the folder. "Now, let's talk about taxes." The words landed with a dull thud, but taxes are never dull when they come with dates and names. Trump displayed another document, this one formatted like a filing summary, names redacted just enough to feel official without revealing protected details. "While you were legally married to Ahmed Elmi," he said, "you filed joint tax returns with another man, Ahmed Hirsi." Omar looked up sharply this time. This wasn't about narrative anymore. This was about arithmetic. "That is not true," she said quickly. Trump didn't argue. He zoomed into the screen. "These are joint filings," he said, "filed during a period when you were still legally married to Elmi." Omar tried to explain complexity, mistakes, misunderstanding. She gestured vaguely, hands moving faster than before, the first sign that the calm posture was cracking. But Trump cut through it with one of the most effective rhetorical weapons in legal storytelling: the timeline. He walked the audience through it slowly, date by date, like a prosecutor laying out a conspiracy chart. 2009, he said, marriage to Elmi. On the record. He let that sit. 2012 to 2015, he continued. Joint tax filings with Hirsi. Another beat. 2017, he said. Divorce from Elmi. Then, after a pause designed to let the audience mentally complete the sentence, 2018, he finished. Marriage to Hirsi. He didn't say crime. He didn't say fraud. He didn't need to. He asked a simpler question, the kind jurors understand instinctively. Do you see why people have questions? Omar didn't answer that either. Instead, she went back to the familiar refrain. Right-wing attacks, dangerous rhetoric, threats to her family. And to be fair, this is important for you as a viewer to understand. Those dangers are not imaginary. Public allegations can and do turn into real-world harassment. But here's the tension Trump exploited with surgical precision. Danger does not negate documentation. Fear does not erase dates. Harm does not explain why records don't line up. And Trump knew the audience at home understood that distinction, even if they couldn't articulate it in legal terms. Then he delivered the pivot that reframed everything. Let me be clear, he said. If you didn't commit immigration fraud, all you have to do is answer the question. He looked at her directly. Is Ahmed Elmi your brother? The question hung again, longer this time, heavy, unavoidable. Omar stared back, jaw set. She didn't answer. Trump didn't repeat it. Instead, he turned another page. Now, let's talk about September 11th. And just like that, the confrontation widened. This was no longer about paperwork. This was about memory, about national trauma, about the one subject in American politics that doesn't tolerate minimization. He signaled the screens again. This is March 2019, he said. A public speech. Let's play it. The video rolled. Omar's voice filled the studio, speaking at a public event. Calm, confident. CARE was founded after 9/11, she said, because they recognized that some people did something. Trump raised a hand, stopping the clip mid-sentence. Some people did something. He turned to the audience slowly, incredulity etched into his face in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. Some people did something, he repeated. That's how she described 9/11. The crowd murmured, not roaring yet, murmuring, the sound of discomfort spreading. Trump let the clip play again. Same line, same phrasing. Then he did something subtle but devastating. He contrasted abstraction with specificity. "Let me tell you what some people did," he said, pulling out a printed list. "They murdered 2,977 Americans." He began reading names, slowly, deliberately, the way names are read at memorials. "These were not symbols," he said. "These were people." The screens filled with images, burning towers, ash-covered streets, firefighters running toward smoke. Trump didn't need to narrate them. The images spoke in a language every American understands. "I was in New York," he said. "I watched those towers fall. This wasn't something. This was the worst terrorist attack in American history." Omar tried to interrupt, saying the comment was taken out of context, that she was speaking about civil liberties, about backlash against Muslims. Trump didn't deny the broader point. He attacked the framing. "There is no context," he said, "that makes 'some people did something' an acceptable way to describe mass murder." He let that sentence land. "You didn't apologize," he continued. "You defended it. You said people misunderstood you." He turned back to the screens. "These are the victims," he said. "This is the context." Then he asked a question that wasn't legal, but moral. "If you can't name the crime," he said, "how can you claim to honor the dead?" Omar looked shaken now, not panicked, but visibly strained. The shield, Islamophobia, racism, didn't fit neatly over this terrain. This wasn't about identity. This was about language. And language, once recorded, doesn't bend easily. Trump wasn't finished. He shifted again, this time into something even more politically radioactive. "Let's talk about anti-Semitism," he said. Omar exhaled sharply, already shaking her head. Trump raised a finger. "And don't start with criticism of Israel," he said. "We're talking about your words." Tweets appeared on the screen, enlarged, impossible to miss. "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," Trump read, pointing to the money bag emoji. He didn't shout. He didn't embellish. He let the phrase sit in the air, ugly and familiar to anyone who knows the history. "That's not policy criticism," he said. "That's a trope." Another tweet appeared. "Israel has hypnotized the world." Trump read it slowly, like a judge reading a charge. "Hypnotized," he repeated. "That word has a history." Omar tried to explain. IPAC, influence, power dynamics. Trump cut the explanation off with a document. "These statements were so bad," he said. "Your own party condemned you." The screens showed the House resolutions, official, dry, unemotional. "Twice," Trump said. "Your own Democrats." He looked at her. "When your own side has to pass resolutions to distance themselves from your words, that's not misunderstanding." The audience noise rose again, louder now, sharper. Trump leaned forward slightly. "America gave you refuge," he said, "just like it gave Jewish refugees refuge, and you brought hatred with you." That line hit like a slap. Omar protested, voice raised now, trying to reframe, to contextualize, to accuse him of bad faith. Trump didn't engage the emotion. He engaged the record. "This is who you are on paper," he said, "not what you say you meant." Then he reached for the next folder. "Now," he said, "let's talk about money." And as he said it, you could feel the room brace. Because by this point, the pattern was clear. Each segment wasn't meant to stand alone. It was meant to stack. Immigration, language, prejudice, memory, loyalty, each one tightening the vice. And the most dangerous question of all, the one that turns outrage into investigation, was about to enter the room. Where did the money go? And who did it benefit? Because in American politics, once credibility cracks, finances don't look like spreadsheets anymore. They look like motive. And that's where the night was headed next. The moment Trump said the word money, the temperature in the studio changed again. Not hotter this time, but colder. Money does that in American politics. Ideology excites people. Identity divides them. But money clarifies things in a way nothing else can, because money leaves trails, and trails don't care how righteous your intentions were supposed to be. Trump didn't rush. He didn't shout. He let the anticipation build, flipping the tab on the next folder slowly, almost ceremonially, like a prosecutor deciding which exhibit will finally make the jury sit forward in their seats. "Let's talk about campaign finance," he said. "Specifically, where your donors' money went." The screens lit up again, this time with spreadsheets, rows, dates, dollar amounts, vendor names, the kind of visuals that don't provoke gasps at first glance, but do something more dangerous. They invite scrutiny. They make viewers feel like they're smart enough to follow along. "Your campaign," Trump said, "has paid approximately $2.8 million to a consulting firm owned by your husband." Omar stiffened. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't an allegation floating in the ether. This was arithmetic. "That firm," Trump continued, "is called the E Street Group." He let the name sit there on the screen, then gestured to the totals. Travel, consulting, media production, digital services. He read them like line items on an invoice, not accusations. Altogether, about $2.8 million. Omar leaned into her microphone. "These were legitimate services," she said. "Everything was disclosed. Everything was legal." Trump nodded, slowly, as if acknowledging a claim that would be examined rather than accepted. "Legal," he repeated. "Interesting word." He turned another page. "Before he was your husband," Trump said, "Tim Minett was married to someone else." A new document appeared, this one styled like a court filing, with certain paragraphs highlighted. "When his wife filed for divorce," Trump continued, "she made an allegation." He read from the filing, carefully, deliberately, like a man who wants every syllable to echo. "The defendant's recent travel and long work hours appear to be related to his affair with Representative Ilhan Omar." The crowd reacted audibly now, not cheering. A collective "oh," the sound people make when something clicks into place, whether they want it to or not. Trump didn't editorialize. He didn't add adjectives. He let the document speak. "So let's walk through this," he said. And once again, he returned to the timeline. Because timelines are where narratives go to die. 2018, he said. "Your campaign begins paying his firm." 2019, he continued. "According to court filings, you begin an affair while both of you are married to other people." 2019, he said again. His wife files for divorce, citing that affair. 2019, he went on. "You divorce your husband." 2020, he finished. "You marry Tim Minett." He looked up at Omar, then back to the audience, "and the payments continue." Omar tried to interrupt, talking over him now, her composure cracking. "This is misogyny," she said. "This is an attack on my marriage." Trump raised a hand, not aggressively, but decisively. "This is about donor money," he said, "not your love life." He gestured to the screen again. "You were fined," he said, "by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board." A new document appeared. Official seal. Fine amount highlighted. $3,469, Trump said. The largest fine levied against a sitting House member in that state at the time. Omar shook her head. "That was for technical issues," she said. "Paperwork errors." Trump didn't argue the label. He questioned the implication. Technical, he said. You paid the fine. He paused. You don't pay fines for things that didn't happen. That line didn't need volume. It needed silence. And there are complaints, Trump continued, flipping another page, filed with the Federal Election Commission. He didn't claim guilt. He didn't declare crimes. He used the language of process. Complaints alleging personal use of campaign funds, he said. Complaints alleging enrichment of a family member. He looked at Omar again. You came to this country with nothing, he said. Now you're worth millions. He let the audience connect the dots. That's not activism, he said quietly. That's a business model. The crowd erupted. Boos, shouts, accusations. Brett Baer tried to regain control, but Trump didn't stop. He was in rhythm now, moving from legal mechanics to moral consequence. You ask people to trust you, he said, to donate to you, to believe you represent them. He leaned forward slightly. And you send their money to your household. Omar protested again, louder now, words tumbling over each other, services rendered, compliance, approvals. Trump let her talk for a moment, then did something subtle and brutal. He stopped responding to her entirely. Instead, he turned back to the audience. Ask yourself, he said, if this were a Republican. That line cut deep because it didn't accuse. It invited comparison. Ask yourself how the media would treat this, he continued. If a conservative lawmaker paid millions to his wife's firm, had an affair during the payments, then married her and kept paying her. He paused, letting the hypothetical do the damage. Then he shifted again, seamlessly, like a prosecutor moving from financial crimes to national security. Now let's talk about loyalty. The word itself landed heavy. He cued another video. This is August 2022, he said. You're in Somalia. The clip played. Omar speaking in Somali to a large crowd. Passionate, animated. The translation appeared beneath her words. Ask us what country we are from, the subtitles read. Trump stopped the clip. Ask us what country we're from, he repeated. He turned toward her slowly. So I'm asking, he said. What country are you from? Omar bristled. I'm an American citizen, she said quickly, representing my district. Trump tilted his head. Then why didn't you say that? He asked. Why not say, I am American? He let the question hang, then played more of the clip. More talk of Somali issues, Somali politics, Somali priorities. You're not in Minnesota, Trump said. You're not in Congress. You're in Somalia. He pulled out the oath of office. When you swore in, he said, reading slowly, you swore allegiance to the United States. He looked up. Not Somalia, Omar protested again. Diaspora engagement, translation issues, cultural pride. Trump didn't deny cultural complexity. He attacked clarity. When Americans ask you who you represent, he said, the answer shouldn't require interpretation. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. You minimize American tragedy, he said. You attack American allies. You enrich your household with American donor money. He paused. And when you go overseas, you won't clearly say you're American. The room was loud now, but not chaotic. Focused. Trump's voice dropped again. That's not diversity, he said. That's confusion of allegiance. Omar looked exhausted. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by defensive intensity. She wasn't controlling the frame anymore. She was reacting to it. Trump wasn't done. He reached into the final folder, the one marked with a simple label. Terrorism. The word itself carried weight. He cued another clip. "This is an interview," he said. "Listen carefully." The video showed Omar speaking, using air quotes when referencing terrorist organizations. Trump stopped it. "You made air quotes," he said, "about Al-Qaeda." He replayed it. "Again," he said, "air quotes." He turned back to the audience. "Al-Qaeda murdered nearly 3,000 Americans," he said. "Hezbollah killed 241 U.S. Marines." He looked at Omar. "And you mock the term terrorist." Omar tried to explain academic framing, context, nuance. Trump cut through it with numbers. "Dead Americans don't need nuance," he said. "They need clarity." He listed votes, opposition to sanctions, resistance to terrorism designations, a pattern forming. "You minimize," he said. "You deflect. You contextualize." He paused. "You never condemn cleanly." The room went quiet again, not because Trump demanded it, but because the audience felt the weight of accumulation. Each section by itself might be survivable. Together, they formed something heavier. Trump stepped back from the podium for the first time, leaving the folders behind, like physical proof abandoned on the stand. "This isn't about one comment," he said, "or one marriage, or one payment." He turned to face Omar fully. "This is about whether the shield still works when the record is this long." And as the crowd waited, some furious, some stunned, some exhilarated, you could feel the night approaching its endgame. Because once credibility collapses, there's only one thing left to ask. Not, "What did you do?" but "Who are you really representing?" And that question, once it's in the air, doesn't need a microphone to echo. Trump didn't rush the ending. He understood something that most political figures don't. A closing argument isn't about adding facts. It's about arranging the facts you've already put on the table so the audience can't unsee the picture they now form. He stood there for a moment, hands resting on the podium, the folders of documents still visible beside him like abandoned evidence boxes. Omar remained behind her microphone, shoulders tight, eyes alert but tired, the posture of someone who has spent the last hour reacting rather than leading. The room waited. "This isn't a debate about ideology," Trump said finally, his voice lower now, steadier, almost clinical. "It's not left versus right. It's not progressive versus conservative." He gestured broadly, not just toward Omar, but toward the screens, the papers, the entire apparatus of the evening. "This is about whether evidence still matters in American politics." He began to summarize, not loudly, not theatrically, but in a way that mirrored how prosecutors walk juries through a case one last time, slowly, sequentially, with deliberate restraint. "You came to America in 1995 as a refugee from Somalia," he said. "A country in collapse, civil war, violence." He paused, letting that reality stand without sarcasm. "America gave you safety, education, citizenship, opportunity, a platform." That sentence landed not as praise, but as premise. "Then questions emerged," he continued, "about a marriage, about timelines, about records." He didn't repeat the allegation. He didn't restate the word brother. He didn't need to. He simply referenced the unanswered question. "You were shown documents," he said, "marriage records, school records, filings. You were asked a yes or no question." He turned slightly toward Omar. "You chose not to answer." The crowd reacted, but Trump raised a hand, not to silence them, but to signal that noise would dilute the point. "You minimized the worst terror in American history," he went on. "You described September 11th as 'some people did something.'" He didn't replay the clip again. He didn't read the names again. He trusted the audience's memory now. When confronted, he said, "You didn't apologize. You contextualized." Another pause. "You made statements about Jewish influence that were condemned by your own party," Trump continued. "Not once, twice, in official resolutions." He nodded toward the screen where those resolutions still lingered faintly, like ghosts of parliamentary language. "You paid millions in campaign funds to your husband's firm," he said. "You were fined. Complaints were filed. You called it technical." He tilted his head slightly. "You spoke overseas and told crowds to ask you what country you're from," he continued. "Not who you represent. Not which oath you took." He looked at the audience now, not at Omar. "And when asked directly," he said, "you always have a shield." Omar leaned into her microphone again, trying to interrupt. But Trump didn't engage. He didn't cut her off aggressively. He simply spoke through her. A tactic that says, the record is closed. This is summation. "You call it Islamophobia," he said. "You call it racism. You call it dangerous." He paused. "But you never call it wrong." That sentence hit harder than anything shouted all night. Trump stepped away from the podium again, this time deliberately leaving the folders behind. He walked toward the center of the stage, empty-handed. The body language of someone who believes the evidence has already done its work. "Here's the question Americans are left with," he said, his voice steady, measured. "Not whether you're Muslim, not whether you're a refugee, not whether you faced hardship." He turned slightly, making eye contact with the camera, the jury at home. "The question is whether identity can permanently shield someone from accountability." The crowd grew quieter, as if instinctively understanding that the climax wasn't going to be loud. "You took an oath," Trump said, quoting it again slowly, deliberately, "to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, to bear true faith and allegiance to it." He let the words hang. "That oath doesn't have footnotes," he continued. "It doesn't change based on audience. It doesn't shift based on context." Omar shook her head, lips moving, but no words came through clearly. She looked like someone trying to assemble a response that fit a frame she no longer controlled. Trump didn't accuse her of crimes, not explicitly. He didn't declare guilt. He didn't pronounce sentence. Instead, he did something far more effective in the court of public opinion. "If these reminded allegations are false," he said calmly, "the answers are easy." He held up one finger. "Say he's not your brother." Another finger. "Explain the records." A third. "Apologize when you minimize mass murder." He dropped his hand. "But if you won't do any of that." Pause. "Then Americans are allowed to draw conclusions." The room didn't erupt immediately. There was a beat, just a beat, where the audience processed what had just happened. The accusations had been presented. The defenses had been attempted. The silences had accumulated. And then the noise came. Chants, shouts, applause, anger, vindication, disbelief. Every reaction at once. Brett Baier tried to close the segment, but the energy was already out of his control. Omar stood there, visibly shaken now, not defeated in posture, but diminished in authority. She hadn't collapsed. She hadn't confessed. But she hadn't answered either. And on television, unanswered questions don't fade. They metastasize. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, clips began circulating. Not long segments, short, sharp moments. The unanswered yes or no question. The paused 9/11 clip. The highlighted resolution reminding viewers her own party had condemned her language. The algorithm did what algorithms always do with conflict that feels morally charged. It amplified it. By the next morning, the debate wasn't about policy. It wasn't even about Trump. It was about silence. About what she didn't say. About why she didn't say it. Media outlets tried to regain control of the narrative. Some framed it as a dangerous spectacle. Others focused on tone. A few cautiously acknowledged that the documentation raised unresolved questions. But the damage wasn't happening in headlines. It was happening in comment sections, in group chats, in that quiet mental space where people realize they've watched something they can't easily forget. Polls shifted, not dramatically at first. Then, suddenly, a majority of Americans, across party lines, said the allegations deserved investigation, not conviction. Investigation. That distinction mattered. It meant the shield had cracked. Democratic leaders were careful with their words, very careful. They didn't rush to defend. They spoke about process, about standards, about letting institutions do their work. And Omar noticed. Within weeks, ethics inquiries were announced. Reviews, not conclusions, reviews. But reviews carry weight because they mean the conversation has moved from television to paperwork. And paperwork doesn't respond to accusations of bigotry. A primary challenger emerged in her district, framing the race not as a rebellion, but as a restoration. The campaign video didn't insult her. It didn't repeat the allegations. It simply replayed the questions she hadn't answered and promised something radical in modern politics: clarity. Omar's support fractured, not vanished, but fractured. And fractures are what end political careers long before elections do. A year later, she announced she wouldn't seek re-election. The statement was dignified, purposeful, focused on advocacy and community work. No mention of the debate, no mention of the questions. But the public memory didn't erase it. Because what that night proved, whatever you believe about the underlying facts, was something deeper and more uncomfortable for the American system. It proved that identity can protect you from scrutiny only as long as no one is willing to accept the cost of asking anyway. Trump accepted that cost. He didn't do it gently. He didn't do it diplomatically. But he did it with documents, timelines, and questions that refused to dissolve into rhetoric. And once those questions were asked on a stage built like a courtroom, once the answers didn't come, the shield stopped looking like protection. It started looking like avoidance. That's the lesson of the confrontation, not about Ilhan Omar alone, but about a political culture that had quietly agreed not to look too closely. Because when evidence meets silence, silence doesn't win. It lingers, and it leaves a mark that no speech can erase.